Hello and welcome to the Unauthorized History of the Pacific War podcast. My name is Seth Perrin, historian and deputy director of the Mississippi Armed Forces Museum here at Camp Shelby. And with me, as always, is my esteemed co-host, retired Navy Captain Bill Tody, former skipper of the fast attack submarine USS Indianapolis, Commodore of Submarine Squadron 3 in Pearl Harbor, and many other postings. How are you this fine March the 4th morning, Bill?
I'm doing great, Seth. And before we jump in today, I want to tell you Annapolis graduates, I know there are many of you out there who watch the podcast or listen to it, that Seth and I will be doing a session in the afternoon of April 25th at the Naval Academy Alumni Association's new headquarters in Annapolis. We will share registration details later, but the event will be open to midshipmen and graduates. And it's going to be first to register, first gets a seat. So if you're in the Annapolis area and want to attend April 25th, you might want to pencil that date on your calendar now. And as soon as we get registration details, we will share them with you. Seth,
Yeah,
I'm
honored to
excited
be
about that.
asked. Yeah, I am too. Yeah, honored to be asked to be a part of that panel and grace the hallowed halls of Annapolis with my lowly presence. But anyway, here to welcome the third member of our crew is Tommy Lofton. He's not here to welcome. I'm welcoming Tommy Lofton, director of the Mississippi Armed Forces Museum. How are you this fine
Well,
foggy morning?
yeah. I mean, technically, I'm right down the
Close.
hall from you, so.
True, exactly. But nobody knew that until you just said that.
Well,
So,
now you know.
yeah, that's right.
It's
Well,
for the behind the scenes edition there. We we
how
do
the
the
sausage is made.
magic.
How the
The
sausage is made.
making
Well,
of
Yeah.
that's right. There ain't much to
Deleted
see, but
scenes.
we can show you. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
So
the plenty
before
of
we get started,
bloopers.
huh?
Yeah.
What's that?
Plenty of
We've
bloopers,
got
he
plenty of bloopers,
said.
Oh yeah, yeah. But you know,
especially at the,
honestly, unless like we completely just whiff, I actually leave most of those in there because I think they're funny. So
it's
but
true. Mm.
anyway, before we get started, we want to ask you to like and subscribe to our channel. If you haven't already done so, please do so. And if you have done so, thank you very much. So, Bill, I'm handing it over to you.
Sure thing, Seth. Thank you. And I'm going to summarize this up front by calling it the embarrassment of riches episode. Why is it the embarrassment of riches? Because after you've done so many good episodes, sooner or later, something's going to fall short. And from my point of view, this is the one that did. So, fade in, Stalag Luft 3. Now, remember, the Stalags, the POW camps, some of them were run by the Luftwaffe. And our heroes are in one of those stalags. And so, the scene opens with them eating potatoes and turnips, and Bucky and Buck are both in there. Remember, they were captured separately, and Bucky was very happy to see that Buck was still alive. There was a comment that Red Cross was having trouble getting mail into the camp. That's not a problem that happened in the Pacific Theater because there was no Red Cross getting mail into camps in Japanese POW camps. But they're trying to catch a cat. And guys, this wasn't because they needed a pet, was it?
No,
No.
not at all. They needed protein, is what they needed. They were
Right.
starving. In the sad truth to this too is, especially at this point in the war, and it even gets worse, is their own German captors are also starving. But obviously, it's even worse being a POW because you're not only losing most of your diet, but even the Red Cross parcels and Red Cross mail they're referencing keeps uh, getting stolen or pilfered by their German captors for whatever is great in there. And yeah, I guess you just find very few pets in a POW camp, and I think that's, starvation will make you do things you wouldn't normally do in your regular life.
Yeah, I don't
Back,
know.
but
I'd kind of debate the starving at this point. At this point,
Well, true, true.
They're hungry for sure because this is
Yeah,
still 1944. This isn't even June.
yeah,
Um, they're hungry, but this and starving is I guess it's not really a relative term. It's either you starving or you're
yeah,
not. And the
yeah,
Japanese prisoners of the Japanese were starving. American
mm,
prisoners of war in Europe were hungry.
yeah,
And when
yeah,
45 comes around, yeah, I mean they do some desperate measures. Not to say that it didn't happen. I'm sure it did. But
sure.
yeah, the situation starts to go south for the POWs and really around February, January, February 45, after the Battle of the Bulge, when there's a huge
Mm,
influx of American and well, Allied, but mostly American prisoners of war. after the bulge. That's when things really start to go south after
And
that. For
not to mention, we bombed the snot
right,
continuously out of Berlin and other, rail lines. So even if they were trying to get food to our POWs, it was getting harder and harder
right,
to do that.
exactly.
Yeah,
Hence the show.
Yep,
right. So here's the interesting thing. I remember an old movie called Stalag 17,
awesome
and of
movie.
course there's The Great Escape, um, where they both, they represent Stalags during World War II, and this started feeling like a recreation of one of those two movies, not Stalag 13, which is Hogan's Heroes. No, that was uh, that was actually hilarious, but
Yeah.
not trying to
Different
be
kind of
true.
show.
Different kind of show. And we could talk about the relationship between Hogan's Heroes and my favorite movie, The Godfather, some other day. But anyway, we're going to do. They have a radio that they've fashioned out of various bits and pieces of what we electrical engineers call bulk circuitry, and so that's kind of interesting. And then they had it hidden in a false panel on a table leg or a bunk leg and things like that. And and they were listening to these BBC about Wingate's mission, about Monte Cassino, and about Anzio. Guys, was the timing right, at least for the radio broadcasts?
What time did they actually say this was in? Because like I said, I know it's 44. It's pre-June
March.
44. Is it March?
They
Is
Yeah,
say
I
that what
think
they're
it's.
March.
saying it is?
Yeah.
March?
They
Mhm.
say
So
open
yeah,
saying March.
and I mean the whole aspect of the radio, clandestine radios and all this other stuff, that's totally true. I mean that's completely 100% true. And there were guys that, as you see, and I know Bill, you're going to get to it when Buck makes a radio, like
Mhm.
fashions a radio from stuff that those guys pilfered all over camp. Again, 100% true. So yeah, I mean that was their lifeblood for the most part, not just these guys and this Stalag, but all over the Reich.
Mhm.
Yeah, the radio was a
There was
was a
some
constant source.
looked like there was some kind of decision-making process that the Allied commander in the POW camp was deciding what could and could not be shared with the fellow Allied prisoners. Of course, I would think that this would all be considered almost compartmented information because you're worried that word's going to get out to the Germans that we're getting information that had to be coming from a radio, which is going to investigate and instigate searches, which is what eventually does happen.
Yeah, the Germans were completely aware of these clandestine radios. They just didn't know who had them or where
Yeah.
they were, but they knew full well that there were radios, that there were all kinds of different attempts by the Allied POWs to get information or send information out for that matter too. So yeah, I
Mhm.
mean, they were completely aware. So the scene where they show scenes, plural, where they show the Krauts busting in the um which call barrack buildings
The
and
barracks.
Hmm.
Mhm.
yeah, and raiding the they did that all the time, all the time. So
Doing
yeah,
the
I mean
sweep.
that's 100% right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
The formation in the moonlight, so they get everybody out of the barracks and then do this. They did find the radio, which I guess, which no doubt did happen as well. And that's the opening of this episode. And at that point, we get the title sequence. And again, I'll repeat what I said last week, because the music is growing on me. So I don't know if we could say that any more
Is it
directly
growing
than
on
that.
Seth, though? That's the question. That's what the people
Yeah,
want to know.
I don't think
that's
the people
true.
care.
There's been some
If
people
it's
comment on there
if it's
asking if Seth.
growing on me or not, I have to say, because no surprise to you, Tommy, or you either for that matter, Bill, I'm an impatient man. So I just go and I fast forward through the credits because I've
That's
seen
what,
them once
yeah,
and that's all I needed to see. So
yeah. No, I let it kind of seep in. So I listen to the music and let the mood sweep over me, try to get enveloped into, and as I kind of hinted earlier, in this case, for this episode, it didn't help. So
Yeah,
here we go.
agreed.
And now, so we cut to England, and it's early 1944, and the invasion is imminent. Everybody's saying that. But the 100th Bomb Group would play its part. More casualties among the air crews meant more replacements. Some guys were reluctant to get to know the new fellows. Some had to, but someone had to show them the ropes. And of course, this gets wrapped all around Rosie Rosenthal and everything that happens with him.
Yeah, Rosie, I think we talked about it last week, or it might have been a week before, that, Rosie, he completes his tour pretty quickly, his first tour pretty quickly. So I mean, they're rolling right along in the early part of 44, leading up to Operation Overlord. There were, God dang, I mean, it wasn't every day, but it was 7 days out of the week. They're flying 4 to 5 days out of that week every week. I mean, they were
Mhm.
really ramping up the intensity. So guys were blowing through their tours pretty fast if they were lucky enough to
Mhm.
survive. And of course, you see Rosie now. He's an old hand. 2 episodes ago, he's the new cat, and now he's the old guy. Oh, I wouldn't say
He's
old guy,
creeping
but
up on 25 missions, and they ask him, "Do you want to be an instructor in Florida or Texas?" And he
right,
said,
right.
"I think I've earned myself a trip to Florida." And I'm here to tell you, Rosie, Florida's just fine. So welcome to Florida. But well, we don't want to spoil that one quite yet because he's
Well,
not
and
there yet.
I want to point out something kind of an interesting as far as cinematic presentation goes. I find it interesting that at the POW camp, they are freezing their tails off, there's snow piled up on the ground. And at the same exact time in England, it's beautiful, luscious green grass, and everything just looks like it's, a little bit chilly in the air, but the middle of spring. I kind of just felt like it was from just watching it. It just felt a little cheap to me that it didn't feel or look as cold. And they're not that far away. I mean, by plane, very clearly, not that far away. It's probably the same as if it's raining in Little Rock, it's probably raining in Orlando if it's a big enough storm or winter weather. Uh, to me, that just looked a little weird. And then I know the Red Cross drops off, coats and things too, but those POWs, some of them looked a little too warm and a little too clean to have been there for 6 months or a year or, year and a half,
Mhm.
however long. Some of the, even though they made them look thinner, I just thought they could have thrown a little more dirt on those guys. It looked like they just bought some stuff off at the front and put it on and went to a reenactment or something. I don't know. It's just
Yeah,
me.
yeah. Yeah, I've been to Britain. It's downright tropical there. I can't
Yeah, of
imagine what.
course. Yeah,
All
just like
right.
Florida.
Just like Florida. Exactly. So here we go. By the way, parenthetically, they do really reveal that Quinn and Bailey have made it back out of Belgium, right? Thanks in France, thanks to the French and Belgian resistance. But that's it. They show the two guys, they make the
Mhm.
statement, and then they move on. It's like you forget about it. It's like didn't you develop that escape way more than you, and this deserves more than that. But
Yeah,
again,
we
that's the
haven't.
first.
I guess we saw them in what, episode 4 last, and they were on a train getting worried about getting picked up by the Nazis, and the next thing you know, they're back on the
Boom.
base there, and it's like,
Must have been
how did
easy.
that happen? Yeah.
Yeah, that was a missed opportunity, in my opinion. You took time to develop these two guys, even though it was
Yep.
inaccurate, but you took time to develop these two guys, and then, like you said, poof, and they're back home, or well, yeah, home. They're back home, and like, how the hell did they get there? And I mean,
Mhm.
if you read some of these stories of these escape and evasion escapades, for lack of a better term, it is fascinating. I mean, it is literally, it's
Mhm.
like something out of a damn James Bond movie. I mean, it is incredible, the amount of stuff and subterfuge, and it's utterly fascinating. And you would have thought that they spent that much time developing those two guys, specifically the one, that they would have followed that journey just a little bit. But yeah, it's almost like, oh God, we got to wrap this guy up. Bam, let's put him on base and send him back home. It was a
Yeah.
missed
Mhm.
opportunity, I think.
Well,
And what's cool to me, you can tie something into your regular show with this in a sense. Um, you have guys who are operating PT boats out in the Pacific who get picked back up, brought to the States, and then sent by the Navy out to the English Channel to run or train
Yes.
or command PT boat squadrons going back and forth from England across the Channel to Spain or even into France to try to pick up, and I think I've talked about this previously, but pick up down airmen, whether it's daytime or nighttime,
mhm.
to get them back to England, to Allied lines. And that could have been cool. I'm not sure that that's exactly how they got back, but either way, I mean, there's some other cool connections they could have done with their story
Yeah.
rather than just, oh, by the way, here they are on bicycles showing up. It was lost
Very
Yeah,
true.
opportunity or missed opportunity, as Seth said.
I'm probably certain that they filmed that and it ended up on the cutting room floor. Something about that, about their escape, and they just had to cut something to fit
Yeah.
within
maybe.
9 or 10 hour time frame, and
It'd be good to
just one of
know.
those. Pardon?
It would be good to know
They
if that was the case. Yeah.
they could have spent 2 minutes on it, yeah, and
Yeah.
it would have been more fulfilling for me. All right, so we're back at the Stalag. You're talking about needing to make a homemade crystal radio. Um, Buck says he's done it before and he thinks he can do it again. So can you rustle up some parts for me? And of course, they refer, sure thing, Marconi. And for those of you youngins, Marconi, there's a famous Italian guy who invented the radio. So you might have missed that reference, folks. And air raid siren, everybody back has to go back to the barracks. There's a sound of bombs, and they speculate about it's got to be Berlin, right? Happy Monday, Adolf. And so they're cheering the sound of bombs falling nearby.
Yeah, so this is going to be so the 8th flew Berlin raids on March 4th, the 6th, and the 8th. Boom, boom, boom. Um, the 4th was the first time that the 8th went over Berlin, and it was not a very big raid because there was and I don't remember all the intricate details of it, but there was a callback. A lot of the groups that were sent out were called back, and some of the groups that didn't hear the callback or did and ignored it did bomb Berlin. It was a small raid. On the 6th of March, which is somewhat depicted in this episode. That's the first big daylight raid over Berlin by the 8th Air Force. And it was an absolute bloodbath. So I'm not exactly sure which one that they're hearing here, if it's the 4th or the 6th. Um, doesn't really matter. And insofar as the Stalag is concerned, they don't care. But just for historical purposes, the March 6, 1944 raid on Berlin was at that time the heaviest casualty sustained by the 8th Air Force in a single bombing raid. 69 B-17s were lost. 69 heavy bombers were lost on that March 6 raid to Berlin. It was an absolute bloodbath, absolute bloodbath.
Yeah,
I'm assuming it's
well,
that one since they said, Happy Monday, Adolf, and the 6th was a Monday.
Okay, well, there you
Um,
go.
I kind of think that was probably the case.
well, there you go. So we cut back to England, and apparently there's a red light that lights up out external. It's an outdoor light that if you're either on a mission or preparing for a mission, that light lights up. And comment was made that the red mission light never went off. Never, it was always illuminated. That they were told that they were targeting Berlin. And then I guess it is the March 6th Berlin raid. The count 16, that's 15 down. And so 15 out of 30 something aircraft return. One lands, it's on fire. One of the crew members pulled out of that fort looked like he'd been scalped, like an Indian uh, attack or something like that. Casualties on board. One was really, really badly burned. One compound fracture. So these are all realistic kinds of injuries flying these kinds of missions with the shrapnel from the flak that they would have experienced.
Oh yeah, totally, totally. And like I said, the March 6th raid on Berlin, that was the raid in which the 100th Bomb Group suffered more casualties on that raid than any other raid. There was one squadron in particular, the 351st, that there was only one survivor. One B-17 came back, piloted by a guy that I knew named Bob Shones, who flew a B-17 called Our Gal Sal. They were the lone survivor from their squadron, and it was, I believe his oral history is on the World War II Museum's digital website, and if I believe it is, and I advise people to go in there and go listen to it, not because I did it, but because it's an incredible story, absolutely incredible story, which Jones tells about that raid specifically. But anyway.
And he's depicted in this episode, if I remember correctly, too.
Yes.
And if I was right, I did slip this to Seth, and I think I'm right, that they misidentify him when they reference him and they're
They do.
prepping for the mission as a major, and he's wearing very clearly a lieutenant bar on his collar.
Yeah,
But,
right.
What am I,
Yep.
continuity director? What's going on?
Yeah, exactly. So they do describe that one of the aircraft was on the 25th mission. So this would have been their last mission, and they were shot down. There were shoots, but the way it was described is the fighters killed every one of the guys in their parachutes. Do we know? Is that a true story, guys?
I got to be honest with you. I don't believe that is 100% true. Did German fighters shoot guys in parachutes? Yes. I mean, was it a common occurrence? No, it really wasn't. It was not nearly as common as it was in the Pacific, by both
Mhm.
sides, by that for that matter. But I I've never heard of a air crew and 100th bomb group, everybody getting executed in their parachutes. I've never heard of that before in my entire life. Never heard that.
Okay.
Again, not to say it's not true, but I
Mhm.
highly, highly, highly doubt that to be true. I'm sure somebody will prove me
All
wrong.
righty. So we're back at the Stalag, and Bucky is indeed rebuilding the radio, and that one brought memories back. When I was a graduate electrical engineering student, guys, I built a radio just the way he's doing it, with wrapping the coil with the wire, and it's not easy, dudes. And so, it's there's two aspects of it that's not easy. First aspect is that getting the components right, and the second aspect is you get the design off a little bit, the coil a little bit too much, and we would also call coil a condenser. Building capacitors out of raw circuits, things like that. You can't do that. You can't build a capacitor from scratch. You have to kind of acquire it. And it looks like they're scrounging parts from a record player. I'm not exactly sure what's happening, but um, but that was all very realistic.
The ingenuity that took place inside of Allied prisoners of war, POW camps in all over the place, but especially in Europe, is amazing. It really is. I mean, these guys would make something out of literally friggin' nothing. And they take pieces, just like they showed in the show. They take pieces, parts
Mhm.
from here and there, all over the place. They would also get pieces, parts from the Germans, by the way. I'm just here to say there were German guards that were more than willing to get the prisoners things that they would potentially need for a price. And so, I mean, I'm saying not all of them by any means, but there were certainly, most certainly, guys that would do that. But the ingenuity that was shown by these people in these camps is unbelievable. And you mentioned The Great Escape, Bill, the movie.
Mhm.
A lot of the things that they show in that movie that the POWs are crafting were exact replicas of what they actually built during that time. Like the things you see in the movie, like the air vents and all this other stuff, all that stuff was dead on, dead on. I mean, the ingenuity of these people was incredible.
Mhm.
Yeah, they made camp stoves out of apple carts and spare
Yeah.
pieces of wood. I mean, I remember interviewing a number of prisoners who did that very thing. They sat there and shared blueprints around different barracks buildings and other stuff so that folks could find an easier way to live or stay warm or heat their food or just, if nothing else, too, it gave you something to do. And keep your mind off the fact that you're miserable, you're stuck there, you're just waiting for the war to end, which could be 5 months or 5 years, or you don't know. Even if you hear the news, you really still don't know that it's over until it's finally over. And I do think in this episode, to find a positive in here, I think it's interesting to see how well they do POW life and showing these guys again, they're hungry. They are sitting around doing a lot of talking about, what ifs, but not, uh, not to the extent that they're making themselves homesick or miserable or anything else either. And I do appreciate the way they did that. And talking about the German guards, I remember interviewing one guy in particular who actually was able to trade a pack of cigarettes from a Red Cross parcel or something to a German guard who gave him a camera and film. And part of the reason he got away with it was he told the German guards he was a photographer before the war, or a shutterbug of some sort, that he was wanting to document POW life and how great the Germans were treating him in this camp and all this other stuff. And so he was able to take a few pictures here and there of some of his captors. And I remember another camp too. And of course, this is much later in the war. Well, first of all, too, they typically all pretty well hated their guards. Even the ones who were good to them or they traded with, they had nicknames for them, quite
Right.
often something derogatory or names they would call the Germans didn't understand, which I don't want to say some of them because it'd give you maybe an explicit notice on here, but they'd come up with all kinds of nicknames and other stuff, usually in a negative way, and the Germans would smile and not know what they're saying, and typically. And I do remember too in a couple of interviews, not that this is extremely popular, but a few rare occasions where guys even would go in the middle of the night and steal the gate off of the camp, go bury it somewhere in the camp in the middle of the night, get back into their barracks, and the next morning the Germans would freak out. Nobody escaped, but the gate's gone. Just stuff, antics and things like that to occupy time or to screw with their captors as much as possible when they realize we're not going anywhere, and even if we got out, we got no energy to
What, how
go
are you going to
anywhere or
go?
go very
Yeah.
far. Yeah. So they would
Yeah.
do as much as possible to mess with the enemy. It's still a war. Even though they're in a POW camp, they still have an obligation to do whatever they can to either escape or fight the enemy in some way. So this episode did bring some memories back for me to some of those interviews of interviewing some of those POWs.
Yeah, so maybe that's where some of my sailors got the crafty idea. On one of my submarines, they stole the XO's door, and he also freaked out. And so,
That's awesome.
um, yeah, and it's not easy to hide a door on a submarine. They're pretty big.
I would imagine not.
So
Did you find out where they hid it? I mean, what happened?
no, I didn't ask.
Uh,
I wanted to be ignorant of that caper, and yeah, but it's but I would imagine that in this XO in particular, I think they kind of thought of him as a German guard. But I digress. So there was some
Another show. That's
despair.
another show.
That's another show. You say, Tommy, that they didn't seem too dejected. They did portray some despair, even
Oh
with
yeah.
Buck and
Yeah.
Bucky, right? So Buck tells Bucky that he'd written his girlfriend and popped the question, the last letter they sent off before he got shot down, and then he received a letter in the POW camp from her saying that she said yes. And there's a little poignant moment there
Yeah.
where Buck says to Bucky, "Maybe you can be my best man," and Bucky says, "I will be your best man." And then there's a conversation about, are we ever going to get out of here? Are we going to get out of here alive? But now we have something to look forward to. And I really liked that scene. It was a kind
Me
of
too.
high
Yeah.
point of the entire episode.
Yeah.
I like the
I
fact, I
agree.
mean, that you see them having a personal moment. They are talking, again, a lot of these prisoners I interviewed were talking about their wives, their girlfriends, their hometowns. It's interesting to see stories and people I even interviewed that had never been to a town, but after the war, they end up in that town for work or whatever reason, and they're able to go surprise their buddy because they sat there and talked about every street and every house in their hometown for days on days on days, and so folks are familiar with it just from the descriptions. And it's interesting to me, they're not talking about American flag and hot apple pie and singing
No.
Yankee Doodle Dandy or anything. I mean, they're talking about back home, but they're not really that focused as some would like to think on
Yeah.
patriotism and the four freedoms and all this other stuff.
Yeah. That's a bunch of
Mm.
malarkey.
Fun.
I
Yeah.
100%. Yeah. Those guys would talk about anything but that. Yeah. Talk
Mm.
about home and
So-
post-war plans, the house I'm going to
right.
build and that kind of
And
stuff.
food. They're starving and
Food.
hungry, so they're
Yeah.
talking about
Food.
food. If you look in the PO, so the Red Cross gave a lot of these guys wartime diaries, and they would draw
Mm.
pictures of buddies in camp or draw pictures of the goons. They would,
Recipes.
call recipes, tons of stuff with food. And there was probably three or four I remember seeing not too long ago online and in person where they're talking about plans to make a restaurant after the war and what are they going to cook. Of course, most of the recipes are tied to prison rations, but I think it was just something kind of fun to occupy their time and their mind.
Yeah.
Of
No
course,
doubt.
yeah. Now, one characteristic of this episode is there's a bunch of really short scenes, like one or two shots in a scene. And this happens back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So the cut to England, and the only real point that's made during this scene is next mission to Berlin, same route. They don't care if they kill us all, do they? And that's it. And then they cut back to the Stalag. I mean, it was a little bit too this is all editor's creative choice, of course, but it was a little too herky jerky for me.
Agreed.
Yeah, just back and forth. It's like a ping pong game. Then
Yeah.
they're in the Luftwaffe, and Bucky's building. They're in the Stalag, and Bucky's building the radios, wrapping the coil, the inductor, tuning, and he gets mad, and Buck says, "What's wrong? Did the Yankees trade DiMaggio?" And of course, the radio's not working yet. And so they're talking about the odds to get out. He says 1 in 30 or 1 in 50. What do you think? You and so Bucky starts talking like he wants to escape. And Buck says, I can't stand this place any more than you do. Cut back to England. And so it's just boom, boom, boom. Any thoughts on these scenes, guys?
So, I mean, I think, and I know we'll get to the overall, whether we like the episode or
Mm,
not later, but I agree with you 100%. There were too many storylines that we're trying to follow, and none of them are really fleshed out, in my opinion, with any kind of detail, with the exception of Crosby's dalliances with the English girl. That was
mm.
it. And I mean, that literally was the only damn thing that they focused on with any kind of intent and
And
tried to
crying
tell.
over Bubbles, who's not actually dead yet. But go ahead.
Yeah, but I mean, but regardless, I don't know. The POW story is very, very, very interesting. It's fascinating. It always has been,
Mhm.
and it's something that I would have thought they would have spent a little more time on, and they did not. And I get it. You got to go back to England. You got to see what's going on with the other guys. You got to see what's going on with Crosby and Rosie, and I get it.
Mhm.
But good gravy, man. It's like ding, ding, ding,
Yeah.
ding, 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 back and
There's
forth.
a way to do it where you could tell the story and spend more time in the POW camp than you do, and then go back to England, even if you want to jump back to the camp later. But I think this whole, you know, 2 minute or less segments and then jumping back and then, oh, by the way, Crosby's having sex again. Oh yeah, by the way, we're back at a POW camp.
Mhm.
It was just too much jumping
It's
to tell such a smooth story. And I felt like they sort of started this. We're trying to find ways to make it all connect with the most important goal to jump ahead in time, possibly for the next several episodes. Yeah, we can get into
yeah,
more of it at the end of the episode wrap up, but I feel like they just got lost in what they were even doing, editing and putting this together, even halfway through.
yeah.
I was pleased to see a bunch of P-51 Mustangs finally in an episode, even though they're very quick and
Mhm.
it looks like there's about 8,000 of them on the screen, but in
Yeah.
reality, there were a few
And-
hundred on that mission, yes, but
mhm.
it looks like every single Mustang that was manufactured for World War II was all flying at one time against the Luftwaffe right then.
Yeah.
And
And we're not there yet. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
I know.
oh, okay, okay,
Okay.
all right,
Sorry.
go ahead.
Well,
I'll
hold
get
on to
there
that
when we
thought.
get there.
Yeah, what I was going to say is, Tony Scott, who is a great director, directed Crimson Tide, which I had a little bit to do with, was, he started out in the music video business. And so his movies were very short scenes as if they were a collection of music videos. And it feels like this guy, this director who directed this episode was like Tony Scott. Anyway, we're back in England. The new acting group commander, Lieutenant Colonel Bennett. He's actually the squadron CO of 349th Squadron. He's in temporary command of the group. And he gets up there to tell them, look, dudes, we're going back to Berlin. And as has already been said, we're flying the exact same route to the exact same ball bearing plant. And I wouldn't order any man to fly a mission that I wouldn't fly myself. So I'm going to be the command pilot. I hope that's a true story
It
because
is.
that man is a real leader.
Yeah, no, it is. 100% true. 100% true. Now, they were blessed. The 100th Bomb Group was blessed with really good commanding officers. Really, pretty much once Harding gets there, every guy that followed him was really an outstanding leader. I mean, they really were. They were blessed with very, very good leaders. Bill, you and I have talked about good leaders and how they inspire their men a gazillion times, and we're going to continue to do so. This is no different.
Mm.
They were. Some groups were not as blessed. I'll just say that. They were not as blessed to have the continuous chain of good leaders that the 100th did, and you know, this is a good example of that, and it's true.
I don't think I understood why Harding is gone, why Bennett had to step in. Anybody know?
I don't remember. I don't.
Okay.
I don't recall.
It wasn't a quiz. It's okay.
Thanks, because I would have failed.
Yeah.
I feel like Goose saying, do some of that pilot stuff. Historian, do some of that historian stuff. Um,
I'm sure it'll
all
be in the
right. So
comments later.
I'm sure it will be. Yeah, somebody will tell us. So they're going to the heart of Berlin. And of course, all that's left in the squadron is 15 planes left to send up on this mission, which is the same number that the Germans shot down 2 days earlier. So the point is, the odds are not good. So saddle up. Rosie gives a short but wonderful speech to his crew before they get on the airplane. You worry about the guns, boys, and I'll worry about the plane. So let's go to Berlin.
Yeah, the March 8th is, like I said, that's the one that it follows March 6th, but March 8th they took casualties, but it was nothing like on the 6th. Yeah, this is Rosie's last mission. Well, spoiler
In
alert,
theory.
last mission of his first tour. But
Yeah.
we've said before that Rosenthal was a consummate leader, and he had a job to do in his
Mhm.
mind, and he wanted to see that job done through, which we'll get to that when we get to the ending episode, the final episode of Rosie literally does see the job finished all the way through. But I
Mhm.
had an issue with them coming in on that last, when Rosie's bringing his bird in for that last run. His co-pilot, it sounded like something, the dialogue there sounded like something that was written on a Saturday morning cartoon. It's like, you did it, Rosie. No, we did it, Rosie. I mean, it was so
Yeah.
lame.
Jingoistic. Yeah.
Good gravy.
Yeah.
Those
Real.
guys that have been hooping and hollering and
Mhm.
going absolutely ape inside that
Right.
airplane.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's true. But this is where the fighters show up. Now, one of our commenters said it's a myth that the P-51s were the first airplanes with the range to stay with the B-17s. Was this commenter correct?
No, not even close. Not even remotely close. I've seen that comment or something very similar appear on our channel, appear on these episodes that we've done for this series several times, and they're referring to another YouTube channel where somebody very clearly has an axe to grind. And just suffice it to say that that is 100% inaccurate. The P-51 was at that time the only fighter, yeah, that one right over Tommy's shoulder, was the only one that had the range to bring the B-17s all the way to Berlin and beyond, by the way, and back. And if you know anything at all about the 8th Air Force fighter escorts in 44, and I know, Tommy, you chime in on this. It was not, the P-51s did not form up on these guys on the French coast and bring them all the way. That's not how the things worked. It was a
Mhm.
relay system. They were handed off. The bombers were handed off. They were handed off. Usually there were Spits because they had the shortest range, sometimes Spits, sometimes 47s, and they would hand them off to Lightnings, 38s, and then sometimes 47s that had drop tanks would go a little bit further, but they only had a limited range. And then the 51s would take them as far as they could possibly go and then bring them back, and the relay would start again coming all the way home. It was kind of like it was like
Mhm.
a relay race. It's exactly what it was. But the comment about the P-47, it was some Air Force bomber mafia, conspiracy. That's a bunch of,
Conspiracy, yeah.
yeah, it's a bunch of
No,
horse shit.
if it had been developed the way that they claimed, there would have been zero need for the Mustang. I mean, they were
Exactly.
still tweaking the Mustang, putting a whole other engine in the Mustang, experimenting
Yep.
with drop tanks. You had a guy who flew and was literally killed himself, not intentionally, but and Seth, you know what I'm talking about, Tommy
Hitchcock.
Hitchcock. If you get
Yep.
really bored, go out there and look at this polo player and who was flying, test flying a Mustang when they put the Rolls-Royce Merlin in there with, you know, some of the aeronautics and other things he was doing with this. Um, they wouldn't have proceeded to put so much money and effort into the Mustang. The
100%.
47 was ideal for a lot of reasons. You could sit there and shoot holes through the 47 and it would fly home about like a B-17. But the Mustang very clearly became a workhorse and powerful tool that the Army Air Forces to continue to develop and put into practice. By the way, back in December of 43 is when they first arrived on the scene with the 354th Fighter Group, Pioneer Mustang Group. And, it's sort of unfortunate we don't see them until now in the show in March of
Mhm.
44. But hey, at least we've seen one little snippet of them in England. Um, but yeah, that was a huge uh, thing also for your Mustang pilots. The other great thing about them is that, as Seth was saying too, they could do relay systems save enough fuel too to go back and on their way home find other
Fire
fighters to
chiefs.
try to knock them out of the air, find
Yep.
other targets of opportunity, knock out trains, knock out trucks, knock out anything or shoot at anything that they could to continue to stick it to Germany in some way. And typically, with the speeds that they were flying and everything else too, we're operating far better in a lot of ways. Yes, you can get into some arguments of which aircraft is better, a 109 or a 190 versus a 51. A lot of it's at the end of the day is going to come down to who's flying it. And the Germans didn't have a
Mm.
lot of the pilots that they really wish they had had at this point in the war anymore. And why is that? Because our Mustangs and 47s and Spitfires and others were shooting them down. So, um,
Mhm.
such a pivotal, literal workhorse. Uh, it's interesting to see that, we've only seen it this quickly and that there were thousands of them on the screen at once. But
It,
anyway,
Yeah.
there's a reason. There is a reason why by middle to the end of 44 that every single 8th Air Force fighter group, save one, was flying the P-51. And of course, that one is the 56 fighter group flying P-47s, known as Emke's Wolfpack. Regardless of that, every 8th Air Force fighter group by the end of the war, again, with the exception of the 56, were flying 51s. And that wasn't because of some stupid conspiracy. It's because
no.
it was a better
And
airplane.
and you had a lot of the Ninth Air Force squadrons doing the same and assigned to the Eighth Air Force. I'm talking about Ninth Air Force itself.
Mhm.
A lot of those planes too would switch to the 47 at some point, late 44, as the mission changed a little bit, and then back
Right.
and forth to the Mustang. But that's more history for later on.
Yep. Ninth Air
Mhm.
Force was a
Okay.
tactical, and eighth was strategic. But that's anyway.
Yeah.
Go for
I
it.
will say the the scene itself, though, is visually spectacular. The
Oh yeah.
dogfight, the melee
Oh
that
yeah.
was exploded with every Mustang that was ever built was in the scene. About 1,000 of them
Yeah.
showing up.
I
They were
know that
just
was
so
an exaggeration, but that
yeah.
exaggeration, it really sort of felt real when I watched it at first. Like, I think there really were like 600 or 800 of them or something on that mission, if I remember correctly. It was a bunch, but to me,
Mm.
when they started flying over and I'm sitting here counting, like, okay, they're in groups here and they're groups here, and trying to do some simple Mississippi math, I'm like, man, this looks like there's well over 1,000 aircraft, P-51s in the. All at once. But
It was
visually,
pretty though.
it did look impressive, but
Mhm.
Yeah, it did.
And
All right, so the 14th is returning. Rosie, of course, completes his 25th missions. This is the scene, the shot you were talking about,
yeah,
Seth, where Rosie does a low pass and then buzzes
mhm.
the tower, which I believe he would have done.
He did.
Um,
oh yeah.
and what about that? The abandoned pub, everyone's. And one of the things I noticed about this scene, though, once they're congratulating him, they're having this party for him, everybody is wearing a silver star. Just about every experienced pilot at this point in this shot is sporting a
I
silver
didn't notice
star.
it.
I
Didn't
actually didn't
notice.
even notice it.
Yeah, I didn't
Well,
see it.
I notice these things, right?
Yeah. Well,
Obviously.
part of it, I mean,
Well,
I could see that being plausible because your morale is horrible at this point.
yeah.
And they even,
Mm,
if you listen to the narration, which hopefully that's what you do, and part of the reason they put it in there, there's a lot more of it from Crosby than any other episode, but you see a lot of
mm,
fresh faces coming in, and you see a lot of faces of those same faces disappearing in this episode, or that reference to their turnover rate and their replacement rate, and how you don't want to get to know the guys because they're getting shot down tomorrow and that kind of thing.
right.
I got to think they probably did give some awards out here and there to try to boost the morale a little bit and make it. Uh, I mean, I don't know that, but this is just me guessing a little bit. I would have to go back and look at what raids and how true it would be for that specific instance in this time frame and that kind of thing. One thing I did notice in the nightclub was that the piano player was not actually playing piano sheet music. It was actually single bar and not both hands. But
Yeah, exactly.
I got to throw a little bit of music mess in there. I know, but it's true.
Talking
It
about
bothered me a little bit.
the
Mm,
Silver Star, Bennett, the fill-in uh,
mm,
group CO actually did historically receive the Silver Star for leading that March 8th,
okay.
1944 raid on Berlin. I don't think he would have gotten
Okay.
it that fast
He
then,
wouldn't have
Yeah.
he wouldn't have been wearing it that
They wouldn't
not
quickly,
have
that
though.
pinned him when he
fast.
got off
Okay.
the plane, you mean?
Here you go, boom. No, But anyway,
sometimes, and the submariners, we did that at times in World War II, right? But again, I digress. It's one of those things that military officers notice that maybe historians don't. And so here we go. Jack is having a conversation with Cross. He says that brass is upping the end of tour from 25 to 30 missions, but you're off the hook. And of course, people start complaining about changing the rules on us mid-game. They just want us to die. Nobody cares. That happened too, right, guys?
for sure. Yeah, they upped
Yeah.
the mission quota twice.
Mhm.
Went from 25 to 30, and then from 30 to 35. And
Mhm.
the reasons for this are many, not the least of which is when it jumped up to 35, the Eighth Air Force was suffering actually some of their heaviest losses of the war in 1944. But as we've said before, we were putting up, eight, 900 plus bombers on a
Mhm.
raid. So when you're losing, you know, 69 like you are over Berlin, yeah, that's
Mhm.
terrible casualties, but the percentage is significantly less than it would have been if you'd have lost 69 in, March of 1943. It's completely
Mhm.
different, completely
They
different.
would call it,
So
I guess,
yeah,
acceptable losses, I guess is the term they would
correct.
use.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the
Well,
casualty, I mean, the mission quota crept up because of the fact that guys could complete those tours at a much more rapid rate.
Well, just to make the point that the air crews weren't the only ones suffering increase in mission rate. Crosby, apparently his mission rate for having unnecessary sex with the subaltern also went up to 25 missions. Um, yeah,
Yeah, there was a
maybe
lot of
it's
that. And
maybe.
I don't, I mean, I think we kind of got the point the first time they showed it. I don't know why they kept referencing that, but I
No,
also
no,
sort of
just
felt that way every time a German guard said, "That sounds like a Jewish name. That sounds like a Jewish name." It
exactly.
just got a
Yeah,
little, there was a little too much cheesiness in this one in some ways, for lack of a better
yeah.
term.
Yeah, I did think though it was a little too much when Crosby said they all want us to die, nobody cares, as he's crawling out of bed. But so then they go back to the Stalag and they're playing cards and Buck is still working the coil, and he gets it right. A good glue residue, all these things he's talking about are true. I mean, that's the way you have to worry about those things. Or trying to get an inductor to work like that. He tunes it, and he gets German music. Then he gets the BBC, gives me a piece of paper, and he says the Soviets are splitting the German army in two. I think the timing is right on that as well, isn't it, Gus?
It is. Yeah. Yeah. Because the Germans, I mean, the Soviets are starting to launch their one of many large scale Eastern Front offensives at this time, the spring offensives. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's true.
Mhm.
I mean, or it's accurate for the time. And, and then too, there's a fairly significant time jump here in between here too. I found too. There's a lot of moving around here in this particular episode. And I know we're not talking
Mhm.
about the ping pong. I'm talking about just time wise. There's a lot of time creep in here.
Yeah, there's this conversation about we're not going to begin the invasion of Normandy, so that's June, right?
Correct.
Until we've decimated the Luftwaffe, and the B-17s their mission is going to change. Where the B-17s are merely going to be bait
Mhm.
for the P-51s to destroy the Luftwaffe. And this is General Doolittle's strategy. Is Doolittle already general here at this point? I guess
Yes.
so.
Mhm.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
He'd taken over command of the Eighth Air Force, and that conversation that they're having in the show is straight
Mhm.
out of the book, literally straight out of Don Miller's book. But that's 100% true. Now, it's debatable, highly debatable, if they would have actually had that conversation, saying, "Hey,
Mhm.
oh, by the way, you're bait."
You're
I mean,
bait. Right.
some guys could put two and two together, but
Mhm.
I find it very, very difficult to believe that a commanding officer is going to tell his subordinates that, "Oh, hey, by the way, guys, y'all are bait." That's
Mhm.
Yeah,
malarkey.
that
But I
No,
get it.
that's
I
that
accurate.
understand why they said it. They said it to
yeah,
Mhm.
set the storyline, which is
create
true.
the
And
drama.
yeah, but I mean that is an actual tactic. I
Yeah.
guess you want to call it a tactic that was deployed in the spring of 1944 because the goal at this time is to get the Luftwaffe to come up and fight because, and this is something we haven't talked about, and they didn't talk about this in the show, is that,
Mhm.
but Tommy alluded to it just a few minutes ago when he said that the Luftwaffe didn't have the pilots that they did previous, fall, which is true. The Luftwaffe was picking and choosing where they were coming up to fight. And when they would come up to
Mhm.
fight, they'd throw hundreds of aircraft into the melee, no doubt. And they had, and don't get me wrong, they still had plenty of hot sticks flying
True.
109s and 190s at this time, no doubt at all. But
Very
they were
true.
being picky and choosy as to when they wanted to fight, which is one reason, not the reason, not the only reason, but one reason that Berlin was hit 3 days in a row because the 8th knew sooner or later they're going to come up here and they're going to fight. And we want them to
Mhm.
fight because we got this bad bird here, this P-51 Mustang, not the 47, although they did fly on that raid, to go in there and kick these guys right in the teeth. And that is exactly what happened. That's what happened on the March 6, 1944 raid to Berlin, and again
Yeah.
on the 8th. So yeah, no, that statement, although I sincerely doubt he would have told Rosenthal that statement about that tactic and that new strategy, 100% accurate, 100%
Yeah.
correct.
I hope they readdress that in the next episode, maybe in a little bit better way. Because to me, it also felt, and correct me if you guys felt differently, but I felt like it was sort of just a throwaway line too, in how they're discussing it. Like he just sort of hit it and was like, by the way, we're about to be bait. Here, sign the paper if you want to. It was just
Yeah,
very,
exactly.
I didn't feel like
Again,
it was really explaining or getting across there is a huge shift in how we're operating now. I'm hoping there's a little bit more conversation or other guys kind of pick up on that or something other than it just being that one sort of throwaway line in the series and then we move on into, Crosby having sex again or something.
yeah, exactly. Well, I do think we know that the Tuskegee Airmen are going to come into the next episode, and maybe they'll unpack that a little bit more with them. Um, okay, so we're back in the Stalag, and they expound on the fact that the Brits in the North Compound had dug three tunnels. They'd been digging for over a year. 80 men made it out. Many of them were recaptured and executed. And of course, there will be severe reprisals if you don't tell us what we want to know. Again, like that happened too, right?
100%. Yeah, that happened in
Yeah.
March of 1944. That is the Great Escape,
Hmm.
as is known to history, and that's 100% true. And
Without
they were
Steve
not all
McQueen, though.
right.
No.
Well, hold the phone now. I'll get to
I know where you're going. I know where you're going.
hang on now. The escapees were not, there was not a single American that escaped, not one. They were all Brits
Right.
or Canadians or Scotch
That's why I
or Aussies.
made the
They were
point. But go
all
ahead.
our allies. There was not a single
Hmm.
American that escaped. However, there were American prisoners of war. This is Sagan. This is Stalag Luft 3, huge POW camp. There were Americans that did work on those tunnels or in those tunnels,
I see.
technically.
Mhm.
Two that I knew personally, and Tommy, you knew one of them for sure because you picked him up at the airport for me. One of them was James Ingram, who was a American who flew a British Spitfire and was shot down over Dieppe and was taken prisoner. And he was one of the tunnel diggers. I knew him. He lived in Texas, and I can't remember. I want to say San Antonio, but I could be wrong. Regardless, doesn't matter. He was an American who did dig tunnels in Sagan. And one of the other tunnel diggers is probably a lesser known fact, who, by the way, Virgil Hilts in The Great Escape was modeled after, was a gentleman named David M. Jones, better known as Davy Jones, the Doolittle Raider. Davy Jones
Hmm.
was pilot of crew number three in 3 or 5. Damn, I just drew a blank on that.
Shoot, I don't remember now. I'd
I
have to
think it was
look.
three. Regardless, Davy Jones was a pilot in the Doolittle raid, launched off the Hornet that attacked Japan on April 18th, 1942, made his way back to the United States with the rest of the raiders, was then deployed to the Med, flying B-25s. He was shot down by the Germans, captured prisoner of war, sent to the same prisoner of war camp, Sagan, and also was a tunnel digger. And the character of Virgil Hilts was very, very loosely based off of Davy Jones, who worked for
Crew
NASA,
number
by the way,
5, by
after
the
the
way.
war. From number 5. Thank you. Thank you. But
See,
yeah,
great info we put out on this podcast, guys.
Yep.
I had
He was a
no knowledge
great
of him.
guy.
Oh God, he was
Was he?
awesome.
Yeah,
Awesome. Major General David M. Jones when he retired. And like I said, he worked for
that's
NASA after the
fantastic.
war. Incredible
Good.
guy.
Yeah,
Incredible
he
guy.
was awesome.
Well, this is where I was surprised to see that Bucky is starting to get despondent. He says, "What am I rushing home for? Other guys are getting letters. To get a letter, you need somebody to get it from. I got nobody to send me letters. What's the point? Even we get out." And then Buck is trying to buck up Bucky. Did I say that right? By saying, "We'll get out." So I didn't intend to say it that way, but
Well
that's what it
done.
came out.
Well done.
And the
Yeah.
commandant, go ahead, Seth.
No, I was just going to say, mail to service members all over the world, but especially POWs, man, that was a huge morale thing. And I like the fact
Mhm.
that they touched on that. I mean, it was kind of inadvertent, but the fact that he's not receiving any communication from outside the wire, that was a bad for his morale. But I mean, that was a very real thing. That was a very real thing.
Yeah.
And in some instances, the Germans, and this is a documented fact, would hold letters from home just to
Mhm.
screw with the POWs. I mean, they
Of course.
knowing that
Yeah.
these guys are living and dying on these letters, are holding them for that reason. But anyway,
Well,
sorry, go ahead.
this is an inflection point for Bucky because he's always had the right attitude, is the way we'd say it in the military until this moment in this episode. So, um, the commandant, it's announced, has been of the POW camp has been relieved of all duties. 50 of the recaptured escapees have been executed. We've been directed to inventory all Jewish POWs, to your point, Tommy, in Luft 3. Only, and of course, one of the Americans says there are only Americans in Luft 3. Transfer of all operate with us. You're not going to get along with the Gestapo or SS, so your good behavior would very much be appreciated. And so I suspect threats like that were made as well.
Oh, 100%. 100%.
Mm.
Yes, no doubt. No doubt at all. And, again, the fact that the most of the Stalag Luft camps, Luft being air in German, is, they were not all of them, but the vast majority of them were run by the Luftwaffe. And because of that, there was a I don't want to say a brotherhood by any means, but they
An
understood one
agreement,
another. Thank
a
you.
mutual
Yeah,
agreement in a
They
sense.
understood each other a little bit
Yeah,
better than
yeah.
if the friggin' SS
sure.
would have been in there running those camps. So yeah, but no, that was a very real threat, especially after the Great Escape.
Well, and when you think
Mhm.
about it too, especially with these Luftwaffe controlled camps, these guys know, hey, by the way, they have some of our POWs too, which of course we had, POWs here at Camp Shelby, where I'm sitting right now. Pretty
Mhm.
major prisoner of war camp here, and several others across the state of Mississippi. And they know that we have some of their folks, so if they get too crazy with executions and other things, we can return the favor on our end with their prisoners as well. Not that we
Mhm.
would, I'm just saying that was sort of the mutual understanding between the forces was, you don't want to go too far, but would push the limit. And surprisingly, to look at the difference too, German prisoners here were treated far better than our POWs, I should say, were treated in this episode. Folks here weren't
No doubt.
starving. The Germans here actually had a PX. They went and under guard, worked on farms, built buildings. They actually dug a lake, which is now a state park down the road from here, and built that state park up. They received wood and things they could craft items with and sell on the weekends in town. Again, all this under guard, but that's how they got money to go to this PX that we built for them, and they could have cigarettes and candy. And some of them actually found life to be better here. And when they returned to
Well,
Germany, turned around and came back to America and became American citizens, and realized that maybe this whole Third Reich and Nazi stuff that's going on back home is not what I thought it was going to
mhm.
be or what it was. And they really realized, at least speaking here locally, and I think the same is true for most POW camps in the United States, that the U.S. isn't as bad as we have been led to believe. So, of course, it's a whole different experience for our prisoners that are in Europe, and even more so in Japan, obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny you should mention that, Tommy, because one of my relatives, it was in the Italian army, was captured, went to a POW camp in Washington State, and when the war was over, he didn't want to leave. They sent him home. He didn't want to leave. He wanted to stay. He wanted to stay in the U.S. His life was better in a POW camp. And I knew him. And he said, my life in Italy was not, he was a farmer who didn't own his own land. He was what we would call a sharecropper. And, you know, it was much better here than it was in Italy. But he was sent back and stayed in Italy the rest of his life. But so I believe you.
Yeah.
So back to England, the Colonel and Rosie, they're having that conversation we referred to earlier. And so Rosie says, it gives this great speech. It was just a great speech. And maybe it was jingoistic. It doesn't matter. It was just a great speech. He points out that the young guys are much more likely to get killed than him because they haven't learned the skills necessary to survive in their B-17s. And so by him being selfish and going home, it meant it was more likely that a bunch of young crews would die. And he said, no, sir, I can't go home. Not yet. Not until the job is done one way or the other. Again, that happened.
Yeah. Oh, well, I mean, whether that conversation directly happened, God knows. But I mean, that was his mantra. I mean, that was Rosie's. He went over there to do a job and he was going to see that job to completion. I mean, did he want to go home? Heck yeah. Who the hell doesn't want to go home? But he had a job to do. He felt a responsibility about pursuing that end goal. And he was going to get that job done come hell or high water. If it killed him, literally, he was going to get it done. Um, and Rosie, we talked about this before. Rosenthal was a natural born leader. I mean, that whole episode of him humming in the airplane after the Munster attack,
Mm-hmm.
like I said, he did that for a reason. I mean, the man was a natural born leader, so he was going to do whatever he could to make sure that the job got done. And whatever position they put him in, he frankly did not care as long as he was able to
Mm-hmm.
get the job done to his satisfaction.
And one of our commenters commented that he was Jewish and he knew or he could have known what was happening in the concentration camps, which made him more motivated to stick with it. I'm not sure.
Ah,
We knew with the degree of precision,
right,
it wasn't until we
Yeah.
liberated the camps that we really
right,
knew.
I think
right,
we
100%
knew it was
right.
pretty obvious that Hitler and the Nazi Party did not like Jews. I mean, that Jewish people knew that. We had people who escaped Germany just before the war, and even into 39 and 40, that came into the United States and were speaking to Jewish communities. I mean, Seth and I have run into that and talked to individuals before who heard that in their own synagogues and things. But I don't
Mm,
know that he or the majority of people really knew what was going on in the camps, because we didn't have that information completely like we had, as you just said, Bill, after the war was over.
Right. And
mm,
what did Americans know that Jews were being persecuted in Germany? Heck yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Just like Tommy said, there were people that got out in the 30s. They came and said, look, this is really a really bad situation. And it's only getting worse. Did we know the degree to what they were being exterminated, for lack of a better term? Because that is the term.
that's the right term.
No, no, we did not know. Maybe some in higher echelons of government had an inkling, but your average American serviceman had no clue that that was going on to the degree in which it was being prosecuted. No
Mm,
way. And exactly like Tommy said, when RGIs and the Brits liberated those camps, which, by the way, the vast majority of death camps were actually on the Eastern Front, not on the Western Front, but that's neither here nor there. When we liberated Dachau and Mauthausen and places like that, it was, you know, those guys were thunderstruck because never expected anything like that ever.
yeah, yeah. The inhumanity of man. So that was the episode. That's it. And so, general concept, or what do you think of it overall? Tommy, I'll go to you first.
This is by far my least favorite episode. I'm really
Mhm.
hoping that the next few are better and that this show, pardon the pun, but it isn't, really meant to be, but I'm hoping it's not in a downward spiral. But I'm kind of nervous. You know, how are they going to wrap this up? And if they're moving, if they're just now, I mean, they got 2 episodes left, and they still got to end the war, and we're in March of 44 for most of this episode. Still a lot to cover. I'm curious to see how the rest of this plays out. I'm excited to see the rest of Rosie's story too, frankly.
Mhm.
But really, what is this show about to do? Is it about to be a bunch of cuts and stuff like this episode, or is this just kind of a panic to throw everything together to connect everything to try to build into this dramatic ending? I don't really know. I guess we'll see. But I just felt like it jumped around too much. I got tired of knowing about Crosby's sex life. Um, to that point too, I kind of felt like, if you were wanting to show this at a 15, 16-year-old level in a high school, if I was a teacher, it's hard enough with the blood and the guts, but that's a little bit more excusable because it is war. But stuff like that, it's going to be a little bit harder to show in a classroom or use as a
Mhm.
teaching tool without having to go in and edit pretty significantly, several sections in there, you know,
Agree.
across the board.
Yep.
But overall, it was just not my favorite episode.
Yeah.
Even though they
So
had
Seth,
Mustangs in it.
Tommy's worried that this is the B-17 they showed last episode that's kind of been shot up and is pirouetting down in pieces, and the rest of the series is going to be like that. B-17 falling out of the sky. What do you think?
I did not like this episode, and
Mhm.
I just didn't. When we watched it Friday night, after it was over, I was just like, hmm, okay, and got up, went and got a glass of water, but it was disjointed. It bounced like you
Mhm.
said, like we said all along here. It was like a ping pong match. Um, don't forget who your main characters are. The guys that you spin up. The last 6 episodes or 5 episodes or six or whatever the hell it is. Building these guys up. Spend more time on them. And I know for a fact, and you can see it in at least the next episode, they're going to they're going to divert to an entirely different geographical location with the
Mhm.
332nd Fighter Group. And I'm sure we'll have our comments on that because it has nothing to do with the 100th Bomb Group, but that's besides the point. I agree with you guys. I hope that it doesn't lose its way, and only time will tell.
Yep. Yeah, my sense is that this episode was trying to be a bridge between the storylines from the earlier and the storylines we're going to, including Tuskegee. Um, and it did it in a clumsy, truncated manner where a bunch of plot points were kind of left on the table or left on the cutting room floor and just they tried to glue it together and it's not coherent. And so, it's just tried to be everything to everybody and try to connect, not abandon anyone, but they didn't give enough um, attention to any of them that left them all unsettling
Agreed.
or dissatisfied.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it's my least favorite episode as well. So I guess we're pretty much in agreement on that point. So
And I
Seth,
hope
back over to you.
folks,
Go
well,
ahead,
real quick,
Tom.
I want to jump in and say real quick that I hope folks that take the time to watch this realize too that the three of us don't just sit here and talk about all this before we record or all come into
We
this
do
having
not.
the same opinion. I mean, Seth and I texted very minimally. I mean, like 2 or 3 sentences. It was clear we both didn't like it, but we didn't go into why, and that was about it. But I didn't talk to him about it this morning. I
Mm,
mean, we didn't walk into this with any kind of agenda, but it just I'm
mm,
also curious to see what the viewership numbers look like, especially from this point to the end of the episode. Because if the three of us felt this way, I got to wonder how many other people who aren't even as into the history were also sort of uncomfortable with all the editing and the cutting and just how it jumped all over the place. And are they going to stick with it
Yeah.
to the end, or are they just going to say, forget it? It's lost me. I don't know. I'll
yeah,
be curious to see what the numbers show.
it's a great point, Tommy. I didn't talk to either of you before we recorded this today, and I hope people stick with it. I hope
Yeah.
this episode
Yeah,
caused them to abandon it because I there's a lot of story that needs to be told here, and I
agreed.
hope that gets told.
Yeah.
All right, great. Seth, back over to you.
All right. Well, with that, we want to thank you for listening in on our conversation. Please subscribe to the Unauthorized History of the Pacific War podcast wherever you receive your podcast. Give us a rating and review. We do appreciate it. If you want to see the video version of this, if you're not already looking at it, look at our YouTube channel called the Unauthorized History of the Pacific War podcast. Send us an email if you have a question or a comment to unauthorizedpacificpodcast@gmail.com. So once again, my name is Seth Parrott, and I want to thank you very much for listening and or watching. Tommy, thank you again, as always, for being here with us this week. It's always a pleasure and good fun. Bill, bring us home.
And I'm Bill Cody. See you again tomorrow or next week, depending on whether you stick with the episodes or not.
Sounds good. All right.